we're back online.
Okay, thank you, sir. So I'm told by my executive producer that we be back online. Hopefully I can be heard. I would appreciate, of course, some feedback from our listeners directly as to whether or not they can hear me. Deeply appreciate it. So I definitely want to hear from you. If by that I mean you who's listening, let us know as to whether or not we can be heard. Deeply appreciate it. Some feedback. And other than that, of course, I will be resuming narrative, so to speak, and carrying on for as long as I can stand it while we carry on through the night. By the way, I do hear some... I do not think that my...
Sorry.
Yeah. Thank you. So my executive producer is going mute now, and I thank him. We also are looking forward. If I don't hear any feedback, I'll just move on ahead. Though it is somewhat... one thing I can do, I can check to hear if I got the echo. Daniel Arola says he hears us now. Good man. Thank you, dear brother. Deeply appreciated to get that feedback. And, of course, what I will do now is, now that I've been assured, try and pick up where I left off, approximately. But basically, what I've been saying is that while a few happy exceptions exist, teenagers, as a rule, are the most darkly depressing lot you will ever encounter of the human species. They don't sleep enough. They don't eat healthy. They never strive to develop productive habits. On the contrary, they waste much of their days in the developed world, hunched over a screen, agonizing about things like self-image, all the while ignoring homework and blaming everyone and everything around them for all of their problems. So while we are checking into a new link just now put up by Pavel Edward, I'm hoping people can also hear us on the old links, which I presume actually to be the case. And so Daniel, of course, has put up something wonderful that he always puts up. I'm not quite sure what that links to, but hey, he puts it up with the best of intentions. And with that, of course, trying to resume my train of thought here concerning teenagers. These days, few of them have the luxury of two parents. Few of them have good friends. And very few of them have a church community to support them as they cope with the hormonal turbulence of puberty and the agonies of adolescence that it produces. So, given a click here of response to my executive producer who tells me people will be reconnecting. Now, given everything I've just articulated about the adolescent condition, about the state of teenagers in America in particular, who can really tell which one be, as the Sandy Hook-inspired production labels the potential mass shooter, who can really tell among them which one be Evan? Among all those dark, mascara-streaked, emo gothic kids who look like the Walking Dead anyway, which one can possibly be the one that takes everybody else out? The proverbial teenage mass murderer. Obviously, said individual cannot be sniffed out by a group of students and teachers equipped with a few hours of what essentially amounts to suicide prevention training. And yet most potential shooters usually act out in some way and have a large amount of documentation on file in the form of disciplinary referrals, behavioral intervention plans, and abysmal report cards that should indeed serve as warnings of suicidal/homicidal tendencies. Frequently, though, this too means nothing. No heart-to-heart, come-to-Jesus speech from a concerned adult will ever fix a broken home. No number of suspensions and restorative practices will ever help a student who be hopelessly lonely. And, apparently, no legal authority, however well informed, can stop a young person from illegally acquiring a firearm and domestically producing bombs. If an angry teenager wants to shoot up a school, he usually can unless he does something obviously stupid. So if gun control in and of itself and suicide prevention training can do little to change this situation, what will it take? In order to answer this, society must ask a completely different question. Why are the shootings happening in the first? This seems an impossible question with a million different answers on the surface of it. However, the only answer needed be the one that holds true for all high school shootings. So, to find out what holds true for all high school shootings, perhaps we would need a different approach. The better question being, what do all of they have in common? Two words. The goddamn internet. In the decades preceding Columbine, kids struggled with the same kinds of problems and had the same potential access to firearms we do today. They also attended schools that were far easier targets. Nevertheless, far fewer mass school shootings ever took place, and none of them had the body counts that have become normalized today. This be because depressed and angry teenagers never became radicalized by countless hours of online propaganda, sourcing from the alternative right, as pumped and supplied by the motherfucking Kremlin. Today, our teenagers can log in instantaneously and learn about various ideologies of hate, educate themselves on maximizing their destructive potential, and desensitize their consciences, with pornography and violence. This internet radicalization be essentially the same thing that's happened with Islamic terrorists all over the Western world. So why not take it away? This sound is extreme, but it falls in line with the other things society prohibits from kids. We prohibit driving to the underaged. We prohibit drinking to the underaged. We prohibit voting to the underage. We even prohibit joining the military to the underaged to degree. Most parents don't allow even their teenage kids to go anywhere alone. However, when it comes to the internet, a vast, unregulated repository of every horrible thing imaginable and most things you can never imagine,
adults let their unsuspecting children roam wild and free, sans any protection whatsoever. That so many do this betrays a pervasive kind of materialist worldview that agonizes over every physical danger whilst remaining completely oblivious to any spiritual or psychological threat to the psyche, which means one's soul in the original Greek definition. So in order to combat the violence and bullying happening at schools, parents in all communities should take away the goddamn smartphones and all the fucking personal computers from physical reach of their children, and to strictly oversee what little usage they may ever deem appropriate till their children be of legal age. Like employing the computer for emailing grandma, or typing up an assignment for school. With this form of deprivation of cyberspace, imagine the benefits in store. Safer schools, happier youth, and an internet at least partially purged of the garbage produced by and for young people. And a definite curtailment of Russian influence on the degenerative American mind. Now, those worried about taking away young people's freedom to browse should consider the other greater freedoms at stake because of school violence. With every school shooting, no matter who or what causes it, politicians do indeed demand the end of the right to bear arms, crackdowns on hate speech, and government's intrusions into child rearing. These rights have already disappeared, as Americans would consider them, in both Canada and Western Europe. And those places don't even have school shootings. So, successfully defending these rights does not depend on better arguments, but on real action that effectively solves the problem of school shootings. Concerned parents and those who call on others to do something should now lead the charge and take away internet access from children until they reach maturity, after much education and training in critical thinking and what religiously we would call discernment. This could save not just their lives, but their very souls. And if you be a rational, materialistic atheist, at least their innocence and well-being. Because the reactionaries, the radicalized conservatives, no longer conservative at all, but revolutionary reactionary, these alternative rightists, these rightists have weaponized the First Amendment. On the final day of the Supreme Court term in the last week of June, just yesteryear, Justice Elena Kagan sounded an alarm. The court's 5 conservative members, citing the First Amendment, had just dealt public unions a devastating blow. The day before that infamous date, the same majority had used the First Amendment to reject a California law requiring religiously oriented crisis pregnancy centers to provide women with information about abortion. These so-called conservatives, these radicalized reactionaries, per Justice Kagan, who be part of the court's 4-member liberal wing, were weaponizing the First Amendment. And those 2 decisions were the latest at the time in a stunning run of victories for a reactionary agenda that has increasingly been built on the foundation of free speech. Reactionary networks, borrowing and building on arguments developed by liberals, have deployed the First Amendment, exploited it to justify unlimited campaign spending, discrimination against gay couples, and a tax on the regulation of tobacco, pharmaceuticals, and firearms. Bert Newborn, a law professor at New York University, observed, "The right, which had for years been hostile to and very nervous about a strong First Amendment, has rediscovered and exploited it to point of rendering it a weapon of mass social destruction." The Citizens United campaign finance case, for instance, was decided on free speech grounds, with the 5-justice conservative majority ruling that the First Amendment protects unlimited campaign spending by corporations. The government, the majority said, has no business regulating political speech. The dissenters responded that the First Amendment did not require allowing corporate money to flood the political marketplace and derail democracy by total corruption. Ilya Shapiro, a lawyer with the Cato Institute, observes that the libertarian position has become dominant on the right on First Amendment issues. It simply means that we should be skeptical of government attempts to regulate speech. That used to be an uncontroversial and non-ideological point. What's now being called the libertarian position on speech was, circa the 1960s, the liberal position on speech. And an increasingly radicalized reactionary judiciary has been more than a little receptive to this argument. A new analysis prepared for the New York Times found that the Supreme Court under Chief Justice John G. Roberts Jr. has been far more likely to embrace free speech arguments concerning reactionary speech than liberal speech. That be a sharp break from earlier eras. As a result, liberals, who once championed expansive First Amendment rights, are now quite rightly uneasy about them. To quote Floyd Abrams, a prominent First Amendment attorney and a supporter of broad free speech rights, he says, "The left was once not just on board, but leading in supporting the broadest First Amendment protections. Now the progressive community is at least skeptical and sometimes distraught at the level of First Amendment protection which is being afforded in cases brought by litigants on the right, the producers of mass shooters. Many on the left have traded an absolutist commitment to free speech for one sensitive to the harms it can inflict. This is, of course, my baseline stance. Take pornography and street protests. Liberals were once largely united in fighting to protect sexually explicit materials from government censorship. Now, many on the left recognize child pornography as an assault on children's rights, whereas the radicalized right wants child pornography available for everyone, because children have no rights to the radical right. They want to do away with child labor laws, because the libertarian position be that that's government interference in capitalism, and that laissez-faire capitalism would allow the market to exploit the chiefest, indeed the freest of all labor, one's children. Circa 1977, many liberals supported the right of the American Nazi Party to march among Holocaust survivors in Skokie, Illinois. Far fewer supported the free speech rights of the white nationalists who marched last year in Charlottesville, Virginia, because these motherfuckers had murder on their minds, which they realized with the beatdown half to death of a black male and the ritual satanic sacrifice of a breeding age white female under the occult supervision of Augustus Invictus, the man who deems himself the heir to Michael Aquino. Frederick Schauer, a law professor at the University of Virginia, where that sacrifice took place, observes that there was a certain naivete in how liberals used to approach free speech. To quote his T, because so many free speech claims of the 1950s and 1960s involved anti-obscenity claims, or civil rights and anti-Vietnam War protests, it was easy for the left to sympathize with the speakers or believe that speech in general was harmless. But the claim that speech was harmless or casually inert was never true, even if it has taken recent events to convince the left of that. The question then be why the left ever believed otherwise. Some liberals now agree that free speech disproportionately protects the powerful and the status quo. Louis Michael Seidman, law professor at Georgetown, says, "When I was younger, I had more of the standard liberal view of civil liberties, and I've gradually changed my mind about it. What I have come to see be that it's a mistake to think of free speech as an effective means to accomplish a more just society." So, in her work entitled The Free Speech Century, which be a collection of essays to be published this year, if not published already, Catherine A. McKinnon, a law professor at the University of Michigan, has written that, to the contrary, free speech reinforces and amplifies all injustices. From the preparatory scan of her book that I was privileged to be given access to, she provided myself what I so read unto you now. Once a defense of the powerless, the First Amendment over the last 100 years has mainly become a weapon of the powerful. Legally, what was, toward the beginning of the 20th century, a shield for radicals, artists and activists, socialists and pacifists, the excluded and the dispossessed, has become a sword for authoritarians, racists and misogynists, neo-Nazis and Klansmen, child pornographers, and corporations buying elections. So what we've had is, as with the First Amendment, a change in interpretation. In the great First Amendment cases in the middle of the 20th century, when I was made a product of that time, that world, few reactionaries spoke up for the protection of political dissenters, inclusive then of communists and civil rights leaders, comedians using vulgar language on the airwaves, or artists exploring sexuality in novels and on film. Circa 1971, Robert H. Bork, then a prominent conservative law professor, and later a federal judge and Supreme Court nominee, wrote that the First Amendment should be interpreted narrowly in law review articles that he himself wrote, one of which remaineth one of the most cited law review articles of all time, from which I read unto you now: constitutional protection should be accorded only to speech that be explicitly political. There be no basis for judicial intervention to protect any other form of expression, be it scientific, literary, or that variety of expression we call obscene or pornographic. But a transformative ruling by the Supreme Court, but 5 years later, began to change that thinking. The case, a challenge to a state law that banned advertising the prices of prescription drugs, was filed by Public Citizen, a consumer rights advocacy group founded by Ralph Nader. That group argued that the law hurt consumers and helped persuade the court in Virginia State Board of Pharmacy versus Virginia Citizens Consumer Council to protect advertising and other commercial speech, The only dissent in the decision came from Justice William H. Rehnquist, the court's most conservative member. Kathleen M. Sullivan, a former dean of Stanford Law School, who I sprackathon to here in California, wrote that it did not take long for corporations to see the opportunities presented by this decision. In the Harvard Law Review, she wrote, "While the case was litigated by consumer protection advocates, corporate speakers soon became the principal beneficiaries of subsequent rulings that, for example, struck down restrictions on including alcohol content on beer can labels, limitations on outdoor tobacco advertising near schools, and rules governing how compounded drugs may be advertised." That trend has continued, with businesses mounting First Amendment challenges to gun control laws, securities regulations, country of origin labels, graphic cigarette warnings, and limits on off-label drug marketing. Since then, Ralph Nader himself has said, "I was a bit queasy about it because I had the sense that we were unleashing something, but nowhere near what happened. It was one of the biggest boomerangs in judicial cases ever. I couldn't be Merlin. We never thought the judiciary would be as conservative or corporate. This was an expansion that was not preordained by doctrine. It was preordained by the political philosophies of judges given supreme power." Not all of the liberal scholars and lawyers who helped create modern First Amendment law are disappointed, of course. Martin Reddish, a law professor at Northwestern University, who wrote a seminal 1971 article proposing First Amendment protection for commercial speech, said he was pleased with the Roberts Court's decisions, so saying, "Its most important contribution be in the commercial speech and corporate speech areas. It's a workmanlike common sense approach." And liberals also played a key role in creating modern campaign finance law in Buckley versus Vallejo, the 1976 decision that struck down limits on political spending by individuals and was the basis for Citizens United, the 2010 decision that did away with similar limits for corporations and unions. One plaintiff was Senator Eugene J. McCarthy, Democrat of Minnesota, who had challenged President Lyndon Baines Johnson in the 1968 presidential primaries from the left. Another was the American Civil Liberties Union's New York affiliate. Professor Newborn, a former ACLU, or Americans for Civil Liberties Union lawyer, said he now regrets deeply the role he played in winning that case, having since been quoted as saying, "I signed the brief in Buckley. I'm going to spend long amounts of time in purgatory." To Professor Seidman, cases like these were part of what he described as a right-wing takeover of the First Amendment since the liberal victories in the years Chief Justice Earl Warren led the Supreme Court. In a new article that I, again, was privileged to be granted preview of, that was to be laterly published in Columbia Law Review. These things, because these journals come out sometimes quarterly, 4 times a year, just but seasonally, it takes forever sometimes for articles to go through selection process to be published. I knew this one was going to be. It might be published by now. But I'll read to you from the preview what Professor Seidman has written. With the receding of Warren Court liberalism, free speech law took a sharp right turn. Instead of providing a shield for the powerless, the First Amendment became a sword used by people at the apex of the American hierarchy of power. Among its victims, proponents of campaign finance reform, opponents of cigarette addiction, the lesbian, bisexual, gay, transgender, queer community, LGBTQ, labor unions, animal rights advocates, environmentalists, targets of hate speech, and abortion providers. In fact, the title of the article I was privileged to preview itself is writ as a question, asking, can free speech be progressive? And the answer, the article concludes, be no. Because the monsters have shifted right. The right turn has been even more pronounced under Chief Justice Roberts. The Supreme Court has agreed to hear a larger share of First Amendment cases concerning reactionary speech than earlier courts had, according to study prepared for the New York Times. And same SCOTUS, SCOTUS, Supreme Court of these United States, has ruled in favor of reactionary speech at a higher rate than liberal speech as compared to earlier courts. The court's docket reflects something new and distinctive about the Roberts Court. According to study, which was conducted by Lee Epstein, a law professor and political scientist at Washington University in St. Louis, Andrew D. Martin, a political scientist at the University of Michigan, and the dean of its College of Literature, Science, and the Arts, as well as co-conducted by Kevin Quinn, a political scientist at the University of Michigan. And through these three academics, said study found the Roberts Court, more than any modern court, has trained its sights on speech promoting reactionary values. Only the current court has resolved a higher fraction of disputes challenging the suppression of reactionary rather than liberal expression. The court led by Chief Justice Earl Warren from 1953 through 1969 was almost exclusively concerned with cases concerning liberal speech. Of its 60 free expression cases, only 5, or 8%, challenged the suppression of reactionary speech. The proportion of challenges to restrictions on reactionary speech has steadily increased. It rose to 22% in the court led by Chief Justice Warren E. Burger from 1969 through 1986, to 42% in the court led by Chief Justice William H. Rehnquist from 1986 through 2005, and to 65% just this far via the Roberts Court of Donald Trump. The Roberts Court does more than hear a large proportion of cases concerning reactionary expression. It is also far more likely than any earlier courts to rule for reactionary speech than for liberal speech. The result, the study I'm citing has found, has been a fundamental transformation of the court's free expression agenda. In past decades, broad coalitions of justices have all been receptive to First Amendment arguments. The court has protected videos of animal cruelty, hateful protests at military funerals, violent video games, and lies about military awards, oft, indeed, by lopsided margin. But just recently, 2 First Amendment blockbusters were decided by 5-4 votes, with the reactionaries in majority ruling in favor of reactionary plaintiffs. On Tuesday, dated the 24th of June, but yesteryear, Justice Clarence Thomas wrote for the majority that requiring health clinics opposed to abortion to tell women how to obtain the procedure violated the clinic's free speech rights. In dissent, Justice Stephen G. Breyer said that was a misuse of First Amendment principles, a perversion of principle thereof. Justice Breyer so wrote, exploiting the First Amendment to strike down economic and social laws that legislatures long would have thought themselves free to enact will, for the American public, obscure, not clarify, the true value of protecting freedom of speech. Now, on Wednesday, dated the 25th of June, but yesteryear, in announcing the decision on public unions, Justice Samuel A. Alito Jr. declared the court was applying settled and neutral First Amendment principles to protect workers from being forced to say things at odds with their beliefs. He suggested that the decision on public unions should have been unanimous, asserting, compelling individuals to mouth support for views they find objectionable violates that cardinal constitutional command, and in most cases, context, he actually said, any such effort would be universally condemned. Suppose, for example, that the state of Illinois required all residents to sign a document expressing support for a particular set of positions on controversial public issues, say the platform of one of the major political parties. No one, we trust, would seriously argue that the First Amendment permits this. In response, Justice Kagan said the court's reactionaries had discovered a dangerous tool, turning the First Amendment into a sword. The United States, she said, should brace itself. She, so writing, speech is everywhere, a part of every human activity, employment, healthcare, securities trading, you name it. For that reason alone, almost all economic and regulatory policy affects or touches speech. So the majority's road runs along, and at every stop are black-robed rulers overriding citizens' choices. So the extremists have the Supreme Court on their side, the radicalized right revolutionaries who would see you dead if you're not a white, cisgendered, heterosexual male. How much attention should these extremists get? Because even if you're condemning it, you're amplifying it. Whitney Phillips, a professor of literary studies at Mercer University, has been researching the culture of online trolls, people who post intentionally provocative or offensive material on the internet. And she's been doing this for 10 years. For most of her career, she had to convince her colleagues that the members of fringe communities on websites like 4chan and Reddit, and now LGab.com, spelled ELL.com, who traffic in racist, sexist, and homophobic jokes when they're not trading child pornography. She had to convince her colleagues these white trash pieces of shit were even worth studying. And they'd say, who cares? They're just jerks on the internet, losers with nothing in their lives. But over the last 2 years, what was once the fringe has become mainstream, the mainstream. White trash piece of shittery, the sewer of cyber shit, is now your drinking water. According to a study published mid-November circa 2017, these fringe communities had even then a disproportionate impact on more mainstream media platforms like Twitter, influencing thereby the larger public conversation. Jeremy Blackburn, assistant professor of computer sciences at UAB College of Arts and Sciences, and a team of other professors studied a variety of groups on Reddit, an aggregation site that organizes posts based on up and down votes from the community, and 4chan, an image-based discussion platform that, it has been proven, be entirely mired in the miasma of the alternative right. Indeed, everyone online self-identifies as alt-right. Others nurture ideas widely associated with that movement, which oft espouses white supremacist, misogynistic, and Judeophobic views. To quote as Blackburn, it was especially interesting considering the size of these communities. They seem insignificant, and yet they have all the power to push everything on Twitter. There be no demographic data on these fringe online communities, but Blackburn believes they be led by a single group of men the groups being notoriously misogynistic. And this secret cabal of internet manipulators be in their mid to late 20s who grew up reading 4chan, which has now been around for over a decade. Citing Blackburn again, he says, these losers have become winners at one thing, very efficient at curating content and enticing people in the information overload culture we live in today. These guys have spent 10 years figuring out how to get their message out. Typically, they use short, catchy messages, jokes, or memes, content that be easy to share on Twitter and Facebook. The best known meme to come out of these communities is Peep the Frog, a cartoon frog oft juxtaposed with racist words or symbols. Circa September, back in 2016, the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, identified Peep as a hate symbol. If anyone has that on display on their Facebook timeline, a sticker on their SUV, you turn around and you walk away. You keep your children away from them because they're most certainly a child molester. These are pedopornoholics. Peep's supposed to represent their green cock, covered in shit after raping your children up the ass. Now, per the researcher Phillips, he says, in my class a few years ago, I'd always be able to identify subcultural trolls. They were the only ones who knew this particular set of jokes or memes. But now, more and more trolling references have been integrated into the broader internet lexicon. Now, one of my students might just have seen the joke on Facebook. Of course, it'd be significant. The primary gang stalker of mine own. The man I refused to have sex with for $1 million, dressed in drag, Stephen Outrim, presents himself on Facebook with Peep the Frog, having octopus tentacles entwined about the world. Now, the Trump election, hacking him into the power via Russian intervention, has since lent a degree of legitimacy to these fringe online communities. In turn, these communities helped Donald Trump win the election, a victory that has since empowered them even further in a cycle of criminality, pedopathocracy, racism, and hatred. Throughout his campaign, Donald Trump's campaign engaged with forums on Reddit, particularly the _Donald, the most popular subreddit, a subject-specific group, started by white supremacist Trump supporters. Of course, there is no other such thing. And, of course, inescapably associated with the alt-right. About a year before the election, Trump himself shared a meme of Peep the Frog's face superimposed on his own body. The following July, Trump hosted an AMA, or Ask Me Anything, on Reddit, inviting user questions. Instead of hosting the interview on the traditional /r/IAMA subreddit, as past presidential candidates have done, he instead chose to publish it on the _Donald. As Trump engaged directly with this subreddit, the media began to report on the forum, which in turn attracted ever more people to it. Since Trump's election, these communities have become journalistic go-tos for a range of political stories. When tragedies happen, mass shootings, or anything as unto the violence in Charlottesville, Phillips has confirmed that journalists have started going straight to communities within 4chan, directly linked to the alt-right, which in and of itself is entirely sponsored, manipulated, and controlled from the Kremlin directly. Citing Phillips again, he says, it's easy to write a story about people on 4chan because they're always saying something terrible. There has been an extreme amount of sharing and amplifying that crystallized what we understand to be the alt-right, which be child rape, forcing children to have sex with dogs or other animals, mass murdering anyone who's not a white, cisgendered, heterosexual male. All of this on a nonstop daily basis, every minute of the day. Phillips argues that these communities started moving into mainstream even before Trump's 2016 campaigns gave them mass support. Memes, she's pointed out, have always been central to trolling subculture. That's why memes are illegal in Russia, just like guns. Russia wants all of you to have all the firearms and all the memes so you destroy yourselves. They're illegal in Russia, so Putin can maintain total power. Whereas here, they're destroying your society. And since 4chan deletes content after every 48 hours, in order to understand the jokes, users have to be active in its communities. But that changed circa 2012 with the creation of Know Your Meme, an online database devoted to cataloging memes from all over the internet. To quote as Phillips yet again, Know Your Meme lowered the bar of entry and allowed people to participate in the funny parts of trolling subculture. Once people felt like they were in on the joke, Phillips observes, they became more likely to engage with the paedopathocracy of the alternative right in other ways. So all of this was a gateway drug into mass murder of the American mind and the total destruction of any sense of morality. Video game forums offered another transmission mechanism for fringe groups. In a recent study for 538, PhD candidate Trevor Martin earned his Philosophiae doctorate, proving a strong correlation between people who subscribe to the _Donald and people who subscribe to popular gaming subreddits. Particularly after Gamergate, a controversy around sexual harassment in the overwhelmingly male online gaming community. Many online gamers felt they were being treated unfairly by a media obsessed with political correctness. In response, many took refuge in alt-right communities or formed new, heavily misogynistic communities of their own. Martin observes, all of these young men felt they were under attack from the politically correct sphere. You saw this instant radicalization of people you would never expect to become that politicized. Over the last half-decade, Phillips has shifted from seeking more attention for these groups to seeking less. She's still not sure that the media has struck the right balance. After that shooting at the church in Sutherland Springs, Texas, Phillips said she knew exactly what media requests to expect. Journalists would want to know how online alt-right communities were responding to tragedy, atrocity, even then. She's always taken their calls, but is ever worried about giving trolls an even louder mouthpiece, because even if you're condemning it, you're amplifying it. And that's how the _Donald dominated the internet. Before the 2016 presidential election, Russian collaborationists created Reddit forums called subreddits for every major candidate in the race. On election night, Hillary Clinton's main subreddit had 34,787 subscribers. Donald Trump's had 280,012. Last time I checked, which was a year and a half ago maybe, Trump's subreddit, the underscore Donald, had even back then swelled to over 500,000 accounts, 520,000. And its trajectory mirrored the growth in size and impact of white supremacist, paedopathocratic fringe groups. Now, if we go back to June, mid-year 2015, the underscore Donald was founded then. When it was created, the Reddit community largely wrote it off as a joke. Because the underscore Donald didn't have an official sounding name, the original moderator thought it wouldn't take off as Trump's main Reddit community. An anonymous moderator going by the handle lowercase JCM 267 told Motherboard, "I actually figured it would just be a nice place for a small group of supporters to have fun triggering anti-Trump people and, frankly, laughing with Trump at the same time." By October that year, Donald Trump tweeted a meme from the underscore Donald unto 1,200 subscribers, an image of Peep's face on his own body, along with the text, "You can't stop the Trump." An inside joke that he's a pedophile. And a meme that circulated on the underscore Donald. It made the subreddit erupt. These losers online were amazed at this accomplishment. They had an explicit example of how they had affected the world with a self-exposed pedophile running for president. By December that year, Reddit's other communities began a concerted effort to infiltrate the underscore Donald. At that point, nigh 3,000 subscribers. When much larger political communities like Reddit's and 4chan's main politics groups became aware of the underscore Donald, they invaded the subreddit, downvoted all its posts, and harassed its users. Because, of course, they're known pedophiles and pedopornoholics. These are predators who had abused many other users online while they grew up. And yet, some of these people engaging in that siege ended up sticking around. Because the cycle of violence can turn some victims into pedopredators themselves. By April of 2016, into the opening months, towards summer season of the next year, mainstream media began publishing articles about the underscore Donald. That time ranking at 114,000 subscribers. As Trump won a string of primaries, the underscore Donald amassed over 100,000 new subscribers overnight. Responding to this growth, the New York Times, Mashable, and Vice all covered the community, providing it free promotion for pedopornography. By June of 2016, after the Pulse nightclub shooting, which almost took the life of my surrogate son, the death of what the underscore Donald called 100 faggots attracted 11,712 subscribers within a single day, rendering its new total 155,900 subscribers. When Reddit censored news about the shooter Omar Mateen trying to prevent racist speculation around the event, users on the underscore Donald were furious about what they saw as a concession to political correctness. In the past, Reddit has been criticized for allowing users to mistakenly identify people they believe to be perpetrators of an attack. but frustrated by what was considered censorship of that almighty right-wing free speech, many new subscribers posted to the _Donald to complain. Whereby next month that year, July of 2016, when Trump himself came under fire for sharing an image with a Star of David photoshopped onto Hillary Clinton, he adopted a defense that originated on the _Donald. By this time, rating 172,000 subscribers. The _Donald users argued that the same Star of David symbol has been used on the cover of a popular children's coloring book. Trump's reference to a theme popular in the online community among pedophiles who use that same children's coloring book to lure children into their site so they could find out their addresses, trace them to their homes via their IPs, and rape them. Trump's knowing reference to this theme popular in the pedophile community online brought it even further attention, empowering it in an endless cycle of pedopathocratic revolution. That same month, the _Donald hosted Donald Trump online as a guest for an AMA, rocketing their subscribers to 192,700. By November that year, the _Donald celebrated Trump's victory in the presidential election, increasing their number on board to 280,000 subscribers overnight. After election, this message from one of the _Donald's moderators quickly became the most popular post in the group. It went, "How does it feel, centipedes? The God Emperor said that we would get tired of winning. Are you tired of winning yet? Feel vindicated, centipedes. It's over, and there'll be nothing they can do about it. We be the future. And the devil take the children." By September of the next year, the _Donald had hit 500,000 subscribers. There was no sign of its growth slowing then. And by then, child pornography was openly traded among 500,000 people. And one of the people, the primary Russian propagandist given full state support amid all this trauma, provided a never-ending trauma that would echo forever into eternity based on lies. Alex Jones, a man I exposed and attacked years ago. That video being published on the Maggot channel, where you can find Douglas Dietrich exposes Alex Jones and expose yourself to the commentary entered on video by the people who attacked me then. That video receiving more downvotes than anything I've ever produced. And now, the legacy of Alex Jones and his lies is what threatens us every day. The systems that have for so long helped to enforce the notion of collective truth in America are no longer sufficient. Russian deception is everywhere. And it is lethal. In the last week of July, just yesteryear, the New York Times reported that Alex Jones, InfoWars founder and professional peddler of lies, was seeking over $100,000 in court costs from the family of Noah Posner, one of the 20 children who were mass murdered in the massacre at Sandy Hook Elementary School, circa 2012. Jones was seeking that amount to recover the court costs involved with his legal defense. Veronique De La Rosa and Leonard Posner, Noah's mother and father, sued Alex Jones for defamation because of the conspiracy theories he spread about the Sandy Hook murders. Jones insisted that the kids' deaths were a great hoax, a performance staged by gun control activists, backed by the United States government. As a result of that, Noah Posner's family so testified, they have ever since been ceaselessly stalked and relentlessly subjected to death threats by Alex Jones' legions of epistemically gullible, yet digitally savvy followers. A fact that has doxing by doxing, as you will see in a blogspot run by my own gang stalker, paid $1 million to spend every waking moment of his miserable life stalking myself, Richard K. Cole, as employed by the multimillionaire Stephen Outram, a man who also posted Peep the Frog on the body of himself. No one noticed it because they thought it was a poster of Jabba the Hutt. The $1 million I would not accept from him to do him in drag, he instead provided to Richard K. Cole so he could afford to spend every waking moment stalking me doxing, as documented on his own blogspot. So too did this family that produced a child stolen from them by Adam Lanza, the mass shooter, get exposed to ceaseless, relentless doxing on their own home and residence, as provided by Richard K. Cole unto the world, in my case, which in their case forced them to move 7 times over the past 5 years, ever farther away from the body of their own slain son. Because unlike myself, they're not people capable of handling the oncoming physical assaults. All assets dispatched my way are never heard from again. These people would be taken out by the first attack. To reiterate, Alex Jones was seeking money from the parents of a murdered child because of a series of lies that have cruelly compounded that family's suffering since the initial tragedy, lies that Alex Jones himself had spread. So too would be the case of my life as subjected to the stalking of Richard K. Cole, were I not myself trained in mastery of psychological warfare. There was once a time when the people who think about such things lamented the rise of information silos and filter bubbles and echo chambers, the newfound ability for people to choose their own adventures when it comes to the types of information they consume. Those concerns remain. They also, these days, seem decidedly quaint. Competing truths, so-called alternative facts, no longer be the primary threat to American culture. Competing lies are. Everything was possible and nothing was true. Conspiracies now smirk and smog in the very air we breathe, issued from the giant smokestacks at InfoWars and the Gateway Pundit, and now the White House itself. The Grand Jewess Hannah Arendt forewarned of the mass cynicism that can befall cultures when propaganda be allowed to proliferate among them. That cynicism now be here and now. The here and now, the ever-present. And it be accompanied by something just as destructive. A sense of pervasive despair. Americans live in a world of information pollution. And the subsequent tragedy of this new environmental reality be that no one has been able to figure out a reliable method of clearing the air. The summer of 2018, even more stormy than a typical one, has also been termed the Summer of the Scam. It's a title that nods to the popularity of stories about the grifters who lurk among us. Anna Delvey, Elizabeth Holmes, the con queen of Hollywood, and, in a broader sense, the smooth purveyors of wellness who balk at the notion of fact-checking and serve as reminders of how steadily and readily snake oil can dissolve in the water we all swim in. Everybody's pissing in the pool, and you drink it every time you dive. And it becomes more and more impossible to identify where all the piss is sourcing from. But that title for yesteryear, the Summer of the Scam, be also partially sardonic. The scam, of course, no being a seasonal thing at all, it being thoroughly evergreen. Our empire's current puppet leader, installed by a hostile regime bent on our destruction, built his political reputation on a racist lie. He was elected irrefutably with the help of untruths that were designed specifically to go viral. In cesspits of pedopornography, where he himself dove bodily and was rewarded for it, whilst trolls of foreign vintage and homegrown mold proliferate, virtually unchecked on Twitter and on Facebook, and Jack Dorsey and Mark Zuckerberg and their fellow members of the small fraternity who be responsible for Americans' new digital infrastructures have proven themselves again and again and again and ever again to be at a loss for how to combat this pestilence, this miasma of mental disease. And for good reason. As Kevin Roose, a technology reporter for the New York Times, put it just yesteryear, how the hell do you build something that can accurately and completely rid a platform of misinformation that has 2 billion people on it? Sean Hannity, the year before yesteryear, spent weeks peddling falsehoods about the death of Seth Rich on Fox News. He faced, effectively, no repercussions whatsoever. Members of the American media engage in a long debate about whether to refer to the stuff that spews from the mouth and the iPhone keyboard of the president himself as baseless claims, or misleading statements, or, most realistically, lies. Meanwhile, the untruths proliferate. This proliferation of lies, heating the atmosphere and making it a global warming of its own, day by day, just a little harder to breathe amid cybernetic climate change that chokes off all reason and forces fumes from the farts of Mother Russia down our nostrils. In a press briefing yesteryear, the White House press secretary, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, implied, based on a thoroughly deconstructed urban myth, that the press, in reporting on intelligence about Osama bin Laden in the late 1990s, might have an indirect responsibility for 9/11. Sean Spicer, who preceded Sanders as an issuer of such inaccuracies from the White House briefing room, is himself currently engaged in an ebullient cross-country book tour, promoting the memoir he was contracted to produce, in part because he proved to be so entertaining as he spouted his lies. Slate, tapping into the Zeitgeist, the spirit of the times, yesteryear offered an extensive explainer about the nuanced differences between the grifter and the grafter. Last summer, that summer of the scam, the summer in which Sean Spicer commenced his Universal Book Tour, a grandma dame named Michiko Kakutani, the celebrated former chief book critic of the New York Times, released her own book entitled The Death of Truth, Notes on Falsehood in the Age of Trump. Her volume offering, despite its slight length, an impassioned argument about what be at stake when the president's disregard for empirical reality be allowed to trickle down to the rest of us. How easily Americans descend into the epistemic chaos, the realm of the anti-gods, in which they can grab and devour your very soul, that so easily becometh the breeding ground for autocrats and despots and tyrants, ultimately in service to the kings of Edom. My sister in spirit, Grand Madame Kakutani's gathered elements of wisdom from George Orwell, from the Grand Jewess Hannah Arendt, from Jacques Derrida, from F. Scott Fitzgerald, even from the cinematic analysis of schizophrenic mania entitled Fight Club. All her anecdotes and allegories and philosophical insights be infused finally within her work with anguish. What truly can be done about this? What happens when the lies become environmental? A work entitled The Death of Truth, her work, which I recommend unto everyone. The authoress, her surname being spelled Kakutani, Kakutani, Michiko Kakutani. This work of hers has been criticized in some quarters for its tendency to diagnose the problems of our post-truth world rather than offer solutions to them. You could read the diagnosis itself, however, as its own revealingly sad conclusion. The questions what infuse Kakutani's seminal masterwork, after all, be repeated in several other recent books that grapple with the power of lies. Books with telling titles like, Post-Truth, the title of an actual book I would also recommend, and Truth Decay, a play on tooth decay. The work entitled Truth Decay be subtitled An Initial Exploration of the Diminishing Role of Facts and Analysis in American Public Life. There be another work I recommend wholeheartedly, entitled Gaslighting America, subtitled Why We Love It When Trump Lies to Us. And finally, what comes to my mind is a work entitled On Truth, with its simple title reading revealingly as its own rebuke to the status quo. These books are building on the facts that George Orwell's novel entitled 1984 and Hannah Arendt's seminal work entitled The Origins of Totalitarianism have been enjoying a resurgence on Amazon, a popular attempt to grapple with the new state of things before it becomes irrevocably solidified into Americans' habits of thought and heart and soul. The Washington Post book critic Carlos Lozada has so noted, ironically, at a time when the president's supporters mock liberal sensitivities, Trump's untruth sells best precisely when feelings and instincts overpower facts. when America becometh a safe space for fabrication. That space, that world of the mind, now emptied into vacuum, filled with shit, as Lozada also points out, has long been in the emptying and the refilling with sewage. Stephen Colbert, long before Donald Trump made good on his expressions of interest in a presidential run, mocked George W. Bush and his ilk for their belief that we create our own reality. Here's how Colbert himself summarized his new and enduring coinage, the word truthiness, circa 2005. Now I'm sure some of the word police, the wordinistas over at Webster's, are going to say, hey, that's not a word. Well, anybody who knows me knows that I'm no fan of dictionaries or reference books. Very elitist. Constantly telling us what is or isn't true, or what did or didn't happen. Who's Britannica to tell me the Panama Canal was finished in 1914? If I want to say it happened in 1941, that's my right. I don't trust books. They're all fact, no heart. There be some things that be more important than truth. This is one of the core premises of Trumpism, defined far before it occurred to the man in question to burnish his own presidential ambitions by questioning Barack Obama's right to the same. That idea that there be some things that be more important than truth itself lurks in every new lie issued from the White House, in every new conspiracy theory that be moved into the mainstream discourse. It lieth in every new instance that fake news be summoned as rebuttal, or worse yet, as a jest, a joke, as if the tragedy of our present catastrophe could be laughed away. P.T. Barnum's crucial insight, as he stitched the desiccated head of a monkey onto the desiccated tail of a fish and insisted that his Frankenbeast was the shrunken cadaver of a Fiji mermaid, spelled F-E-E-J-E-E as opposed to F-I-J-I, not even providing a correct spelling of the place from whence he claimed its source. So abusive was he. So contemptuous was he of his very source of income. So sayest he that people on some level enjoy being fooled. Humbug, as Barnum termed it, wasn't merely scam. It was game, an entertainment, a distraction, the kind of puzzle at scale that be reiterated when, exempli gratia, adherents of QAnon tell people that the truth of the world and its workings can be learned if only they follow the white rabbit. The same symbology used in the conditional training, the indoctrination of Christine Joanna Hart, a journalist who took down the head of the Irish Republican Army under orders from British and American intelligence, whose first conscious memory in her entire life was sexual assault by Michael Aquino. The white rabbit prevailing as the symbol of her suffrage throughout her torturous existence. When she came to myself for help and then exposed herself as still under control of the man she claimed to be attempting to escape. In her 2016 book entitled The Confidence Game, an exploration of the minds and methods of con artists, Maria Konnikova, a Russian defector from the tyranny of Vladimir Putin, argues that con artists thrive, in particular during times of transition. Amid the cultural chaos that typically results from the lurchings of economic and political shifts. That be because con artists be skilled above all, Konnikova so notes, at exploiting the sense of unease we all feel when it appears that the world as we know it is about to change. Now, in this time of American upheaval, populism, as it be so termed, so falsely, itself a lie. Populist personated elitism amid the digital transition and the storms of a stifled planet. Amid a degenerative and deteriorating environment in both the world our physical bodies enjoy and the cyberspace in which our minds degenerate. Within the world of the body and the mind, con artists like Alex Jones have been given a microphone, and with it, a megaphone into our minds. Here be a headline that CBS News ran on a Thursday dated the 2nd of August just yesteryear. It reads, Alex Jones's lawyer make his case against Sandy Hook parents who claim death threats. This being but summary of events that make us clear, in its very concision, the upside-down moralities of the Alex Jones case, which involvest an attempt to gloss over the lies Alex Jones has told with normalizing legal niceties. The terminology, the detachment of legality, arguments that his conspiracy theories be merely opinion, and that they therefore constitute speech protected by the First Amendment, instead of a direct cause of murder, as unto shouting fire in a crowded theater and causing a stampede where hundreds die. Arguments that the parents of Noah Posner, by virtue of their involvement in Sandy Hook as a news event, be public figures, and therefore required to prove that Alex Jones spread false claims as a result of actual malice, rather than mere confusion or callousness or negligence, or pure raw evil. Which be to say, arguments that suggest a tacit acknowledgement of how thoroughly lies have infiltrated the very systems that were developed over time to arbitrate truth in America. The principle of satanic aversion and inversion have been applied through mind war, itself applied ceaselessly, relentlessly, day after day for decades, have worked their foul magics. Up is down, black is white, right is wrong, evil is good, death is life itself. The true key, the gateway to immortal life be mass murder. All stemming from arguments that forever engage in a great performance of equivalence. The lies on the one side of the table, the truths on the other. Arguments that participate in that, in a somber metaphor for a time in which journalists be mocked as liars and threatened, mortally threatened, in fear of their very lives as the enemies of the people, and in which expertise be dismissed as elitism, and in which truth has been allowed to be treated not only as not the only thing that matters, but rather as a choice. An option that be oft, being all fact and no heart, but imposition. And what does it mean to ban Alex Jones? The inconsistent embargo on InfoWars has demonstrated the breadth of tools tech companies have to police speech. On a Monday dated the 6th of August, but yesteryear, Apple, Facebook, YouTube, and Spotify quote-unquote banned the conspiracy theorist Alex Jones and his media company, InfoWars, from their platforms. Jones seized on the moment, selling his show that same day as a world exclusive, responding to being banned on the internet, hashtagged Monday Motivation, as well as hashtag censorship. But if you went to Apple's App Store, you could find his company's app, which contained Jones' podcasts and shows, and which has been rocketing up the App Store charts ever since. Or if you went to Facebook that same day and shared an InfoWars link, it would post, sans any repercussions. YouTube still hosted various InfoWars associates, such as Paul Joseph Watson, along with dozens of Jones's appearances on other outlets. He was still ubiquitous and everywhere. The face of Russian propaganda in your face every day that you can never escape. And unlike in the case of the neo-Nazi publication The Daily Stormer, which actually was banned from the web by a variety of hosting and internet companies, anyone who wants to can go to Infowars.com and watch Alex Jones sweat while he screams and shits in your brain. So if this was a ban, it was an intentionally porous one. Facebook has explicitly argued for this sliding scale strategy for responding to divisive users. Mark Zuckerberg, in the weeks before the InfoWars ban, was quoted as saying,
"What we will do is we'll say, okay, you have your page, and if you're not trying to organize harm against someone or attacking someone, then you can put up that content on your page, even if people might disagree with it or find it offensive. But that doesn't mean that we have a responsibility to make it widely distributed in newsfeed."
So in banning the InfoWars page, Facebook took the next logical step in restricting access to InfoWars content. But it still hadn't at that time outright banned the domain. And it had not disclosed how the newsfeed algorithm was dealing with URLs from Infowars.com, all of which be to say, there are many kinds of bans, and they each represent a different tool technology companies can deploy to police speech. Platforms can weaken the distribution of content they don't like. They can ban the discovery of content they don't like, as Apple has done with Jones's podcasts. Platforms can decline to host content they don't like, as YouTube and Facebook have with InfoWars videos and pages, respectively. Or platforms can ban the presence of content they don't like, regardless of where it be hosted or discovered. These platforms sit atop the web in two different ways. One be that they enclose a piece of the internet, hosting the content. YouTube and Facebook video are good examples of this. But in other circumstances, the platforms act as a skin over the top of the web. Apple's podcast app be just a big directory of podcast feeds. Apple puts the hosting costs on podcasters. So to ban the InfoWars podcast in this case was to remove the pointer to that feed from the app. In Apple's podcast app, all you have to do to keep listening to Alex Jones is manually add the URL. It takes but 10 seconds and voila! Alex Jones's podcast in Apple's podcast app. Manually added. This overlap set of bans, this overlapping attempt at bans and distribution slowdowns can be framed as incoherence on the part of the platforms themselves, especially in Apple's case. Allowing an app with the same content it's pulled from its directory of podcasts. While it cut Jones's top-line distribution, it has since driven people to a more lucrative platform for InfoWars. These moves can also be framed as underhanded, as in unfounded complaints about Facebook shadow banning reactionary pundits by reducing their distribution within newsfeed be deemed violation of First Amendment. Legally, of course, Facebook is immune because it is a private company. They reserve the right to serve anyone they wish, and therefore the First Amendment does not apply. All these headaches be why the tech platforms historically have made the argument, as Twitter continued to do so for the longest time, that these platforms be the embodiment of the marketplace of ideas. Facebook's version be that it wants to give everyone a voice. It might not be pretty, an executive might grimace, but this is how the world works. Like what they said about the Russian lunatic here in San Francisco, who legally is provided right to place a rapid-fire firearm with a sniper scope by his window that overlooks a playground full of young girls on a daily basis. Oh, that's just the world we live in. Think about what this position gets the tech companies. They take us no responsibility for which ideas public figures and publishers succeed, because those people naturally or organically rose to the top of their algorithmic systems. Which I would too if I went around and said, kill cunts! Fuck niggas! I would be at the top of the charts. Because I would be supporting the Aquino agenda. I would be interviewed on 60 Minutes. So Alex Jones and his followers are probably right to be mad. They took the tech world at face value, played the game as it was sold to them by a generation of internet entrepreneurs, and they succeeded on the basis of being as repulsive as possible and thereby gaining immediate attention everywhere they took a shit in cyberspace. But the abstraction of the marketplace of ideas has always been embedded in a very particular set of technical operations. To be good on YouTube wasn't just to make a good video, but to make good YouTube videos. That being, to optimize them to get distributed on the platform so that your other videos would get served up, so that your channel would get recommended. Sure, some of the ideas were contained in the content people produced, but many of the ways to win in the marketplace were independent of anything inside the content itself. The key strategies were socio-technical, based on an understanding of the platform's preferences and algorithmic signals. This is where Michael Aquino's intelligence network-supported propagandists always won out. With the NSA gaming the algorithms, Alex Jones is always on top. The internet may have been marketed as a marketplace of ideas, but the way to gain the largest following be to understand the topology of social distribution. And the most important ideas be how the platforms interpret themselves. As the organic, so-called organic functioning of these content systems has churned away, the big platforms have found some uncomfortable truths about what succeeded according to their extant rules. What they built be at odds with what they thought they were building. So bit by bit, they be abandoning the abstractions of free speech, however that may be construed. So this is going to continue being a very ugly, terribly fraught process. But let's be real. This be just the latest of many tweaks the tech boys, the power boys, the people who run your mind have been making to the structural conditions of media. These same technology companies methodically disassembled the media industry in the course of less than a decade, snatching up most of the profits in digital advertising for themselves, and sending media companies careening down dead ends. Newspapers are struggling. Magazines are struggling. There are thousands fewer reporters than there used to be. In the scheme of these things, it's hard to get worked up over Alex Jones's right to be discovered in the Apple Podcasts app. Many far better actual journalists and pundits have been buried by the behavior of these platforms than Alex Jones himself as a specifically repellent conspiracy theorist. But he and his fans have one thing right in their lamentations. These platforms have tremendous power. They have hardly begun to exploit it. And it's no clear at all how anyone can stop them from doing so. And that's why it became so important to my own individual case, with which we're going to close this show off with, taking us to the bottom of this hour, when I myself was effectively banned from Facebook for what amounted ultimately to over half a month. All simultaneous to Instagram and Facebook finally making a show of banning far-right extremists. Facebook and Instagram have all too lately, during the same period of time that I was missing in action, based on, of course, the misreports boasted of by Stephen K. Richard K. Cole himself in direct employment of Stephen Outram, both in service, ultimately, of course, to Michael Aquino, by, again, their own boasts and admissions. All of this was because they misinformed Facebook that I was a far-right extremist. So Alex Jones was banned in the week that I was banned. During that fortnight, that fortnight in which I myself was offline on social media, Alex Jones was finally banned. InfoWars was finally banned. The bottom bitch butt boy to Donald Trump himself, Milo Yiannopoulos, his little queer propagandist, he doesn't deserve that term, he's just a faggot, got his faggot ass taken offline. Paul Joseph Watson was banned offline. Laura Loomer was banned offline. Paul Nellon was banned offline. And Louis Farrakhan, all of them removed from the platforms of Facebook and its subdepartmental Instagram, which be owned by Facebook. The one thing in common with all of them, these fuckers are all alt-right. And so they're permanently gone. But I'm a true conservative and a radicalized centrist. And I bounce back. Whereas accounts from Alex Jones, Milo Yiannopoulos, and Louis Farrakhan, among the several others I've aforecited, have been permanently kicked off both these platforms. This move coming as Facebook, which owns Instagram, continues to grapple with its utter inability to root out right-wing extremist views and misinformation, and its complicity in election interference. Instagram might be best known for seemingly flawless influencers, but the platform has become fertile ground for conspiracists who have collectively garnered millions of followers. Banning these extremist figures be a step toward stricter moderation of extremist views. But time and again, we've seen that the internet's worst actors always find new ways to exploit platforms. Now, in terms of this effort to contain Russian disinformation and Russophiliac collaborationist extremism that have spread as a cancer across these platforms, both Instagram and its parent company, Facebook, have, and I reiterate, I reemphasize, permanently banned Alex Jones, InfoWars, Milo Yiannopoulos, Paul Joseph Watson, Laura Loomer, and Paul Nellon under their new policies against dangerous individuals and organizations that promote mass murder. Also, in that thematic, banning the Nation of Islam leader, Louis Farrakhan, who has repeatedly issued Judeophobic statements. InfoWars be subject to the strictest ban. Facebook and Instagram have removed any content containing InfoWars videos, radio segments, or articles unless the post be explicitly condemning said content. And Facebook will also remove any group set up to share InfoWars content and events promoting any of the banned extremist figures I have just named, all according to company spokespersons. Note as well that Twitter, YouTube, and Apple have also joined in banning Jones and InfoWars, though I have not analyzed how far their bans go and how effective they be. Considering what I've just articulated and the porousness of their bans, it all might just be show. But on the platforms that I work with the most, my executive producer and my brother in battle, Daniel Arola, employing Twitter and I myself using Facebook, these are the most immediate platforms with which we familiarize ourselves and ourselves exploit towards self-promotion, on which Jones, Yiannopoulos, Watson, Loomer, Nellon, and Farrakhan are all, as well, personally banned. Not just their public community fan pages, but their personal friends pages, as are any accounts set up in their likeness. But users may still praise those figures on Instagram and share content related to them that does no violate other Instagram and Facebook terms of service. So, a Facebook spokesperson did confirm to myself via email that we've always banned individuals or organizations that promote or exchange or engage in violence and hate, regardless of ideology. The process for evaluating potential violators be extensive, and it be what led us to our decision to remove these accounts today. That's what he said a fortnight ago. Before, I myself was offline by force. Now, while Facebook had previously taken partial action against Alex Jones, he and other white supremacist extremists found a welcome home on Instagram, owned by Facebook, where they garnered hundreds of thousands of followers, rendering that platform fertile ground for conspiracy theories, misinformation, and extremist thought. As I myself reported in March this year, right-wing meme pages such as @the_typical_liberal and Uncle Sam's Misguided Children, which is a anagram for USMC, Uncle Sam's Misguided Children, be all about child pornography and pedophilia, you can see scumbags wearing t-shirts that say Uncle Sam's Misguided Children. They're called Marines because USMC is the acronym for United States Marine Corps. And of course, the United States Marine Corps, under pornographers like Richard K. Cole, using his alias Stuart Allison, exploited children until I broke their pedo ring apart. So, Uncle Sam's Misguided Children, if someone's using that, you know they're a Marine, you know they're a child molester, it's synonymous anyway. You have their own families, because families are always the enablers for pedophiles and serial rapists and mass murderers and serial killers. Their own families support this code word. When you see Uncle Sam's Misguided Children on a t-shirt, on a website, you turn around and you walk away. You make certain your kids go nowhere near there. This is where they share InfoWars content via IGTV, Instagram's long-form video hub. The @ symbol, the _typical_liberal, has posted several videos and images claiming proof that the Christchurch, New Zealand shooting was a false flag, that nobody died. Other Instagram accounts suggested by same platform falsely claim that Twitter Chief Executive Officer Jack Dorsey be secretly connected to the Clintons, who feed baby blood to George Soros, the vampire Jew, and that a new bill would engrave Planned Parenthood's abortion number onto the back of all student ID cards for all American girls over the age of 12. These are the kind of people who feed you this Jews drink baby blood and all our young girls are going to be raped by the abortion doctors, who are out there taking your videos put up as unsuspecting parents and monetizing them as softcore child porn by adding in the timestamps for when your baby bends over and shows us all some butt crack. These are the people whose multi-million-dollar industry I destroyed when, through a surrogate, we exposed the softcore pedophilia of Stephen Outram and Richard K. Cole on YouTube, that YouTube still hasn't recovered from, since all the big boys pulled out their ads from this cesspit of exploitation. But they got rid of millions of comments entered, oftentimes in the Russian, via Bing Translate, by Stephen Outram, Richard K. Cole, Michael Aquino, and all their cult. In terms of Instagram, that bastard stepchild of Facebook, said company has also failed to crack down on anti-vaccine content, despite repeated promises to limit its reach. In March, I found that a quarter of the top posts with the #vaccines hashtag contained anti-vaccine messaging. And more than 2 months later, a Business Insider investigation independently found that anti-vaccination hashtags and memes were still thriving on same platform of Instagram. John Russell, a misinformation and extremism expert, posted a Twitter thread on Wednesday last week, I believe. Either that or it was midweek before. Hard for me to keep track lately. In which he outlined all the ways Instagram has failed to contain Russian disinformatia, or disinformation campaigns. Instagram has become the Russian IRA internet research agency's go-to social network. Not just according to myself, but to conventional sources such as Wired magazine. And in the lead up to the 2018 midterm elections, thousands of Americans were following Russian-backed accounts intent on sowing division. So Russell tweeted, a lot of current right-wing Instagram accounts listed Russian Instagram accounts as partners in their posts. And you can use that to run across tons of shit spewed by the Russians still on IG, by that he's referencing Instagram, right now. Now, simply by following Instagram's suggestions, Russell himself was recommended 240 Instagram pages posting Russian disinformation. Looking at one QAnon page resulted in suggestions for 12 more. Liking and engaging with even borderline extremist content on the platform results in recommendations for ever more extreme content, till you get to the point where they're fucking babies before your eyes to death. Just within the last few weeks, Instagram recommended that I myself follow Milo Yiannopoulos and Alex Jones after I experimentally liked and followed a few right-wing memes, their pages thereof, on which they were displayed, via an account set up for myself by a friend, just as a cover to pursue my research on this. In his own researches, Russell noted that more than 30 white nationalist pages flagged to Facebook and Instagram last month are still up. And he so tweeted, one would think that Instagram would bother to halfway try to clean this shit up. But it's all still there, smeared on the wall. Banning these extremist figures be but a single step forward toward stricter moderation of Russian collaborationist, white supremacist, extremist views. But time and again, we've seen that the internet's worst actors always find new ways to exploit the same platforms. Exempli gratia, after Instagram's promise to ban anti-vaccine hashtags such as hashtag vaccines cause autism, anti-vaxxer cultists simply developed new hashtags by changing a letter or adding a word. Now, again, within the last 14 nights, within this fortnight, Facebook announced an entire redesign of their platform focusing on groups in an effort to give users more private spaces. The NBC journalist Brandy Ządrożny tweeted upon Facebook's group's announcement what I'll read to you now. In conclusion, Facebook is using people's understandable anger over the company playing fast and loose with their personal data to push a privacy focus, which is just a fancy way to hide the other big problem on the platform and evade journalists and watchdogs. There are very nice groups, but some are also very, very dangerous and make the world worse by encouraging mass murder and environmental destruction. One recent investigation found dozens of Facebook groups dedicated to the Pizzagate conspiracy theory. Joining just one of those groups resulted in recommendations for more conspiracy theory groups. It's an endless daisy chain of insanity. And the only way you're ever going to protect yourself, your very soul, that of your children, or those you love, is to understand how vulnerable you truly are, and that by repealing the First Amendment, we then take on the freedom of expression that exists in Canada England, or any other developed area in the world. There be no First Amendment in the Empire of Japan, or Canada, or England, or any developed nation on earth. And yet everyone says what needs to be said without resorting to that from which nothing good can ever source. So we end tonight's transmission with that wrap-up of the problem exposed by the mass shooting that took place yesterday in repealing the First Amendment. We would ultimately eliminate mass shootings, specifically school shootings. It's not the bullets. It's the addling of brains on the cybernetic sewer of shit that your children have been diving into that has generated these sewer monsters emerging out of the slime, high on semen they sucked from Russian cock. Build a firewall against Mother Russia. Eliminate Eurasia from the internet completely. Turn them into an information black hole, a hermit kingdom, where they be isolated from civilization. And then make it law that no one under 18 has access to the internet, other than for severely restricted and adult supervised activities. And then by the time they're legal age, theoretically, they should be educated in critical thought and what spiritually we deem discernment to venture forth in the dangerous vacuum of information wilderness. May you survive the wilderness, and my best unto you and all who support me through our struggles to bring you Vulcan intervention, that our future and our world be a better place and a better time in which to live.